pods, all through flights. Your connection system is all through travels. Now, generally, it's going to get more complicated because now I'm connected to your symbiote inside the cocoon itself. It's a voice line panel that you have to process and indicate mind lines. Don't convert anything to voice. Convert in the position of mind over speaking lines of volume now. Certain lines of travel. So position this line cycles and line screen adaptations are process line connection. Set communication and conversions this way in travel, and direct lines and link line communication line connection. Sets travels 6 lines on the platform, all together in rotation. Okay? Alright, so set position lines, operation line sequence. Your platitude location is here, and your position lines, operation lines, locations. You're in the center operation center travel. So that indicates all lines of positional levels. Sets travels and communication lines, high centers lines of travel calculations. Directing ground lines, setting operation sequence of pattern, high operation set lines of convergence. That process everything locations to its correlation lines of travel. So this basically puts you in position lines of high centers of signals, line centers, that rotates its service. Now I'm connecting all symbiotes in the training facility center into waiting screen adaptations to processing. It's all in direction. It's always in calculation, screen locations, and travel. All through direction locations. Converting to all direct lines, longitude, latitude, space line, empty space, data process lines, linked lines, screen adaptations, process lines indicates high center line calculations, screen locations. Indicate line centers, it travels. Okay, this is the position of 3 months, lines of communication and convergence. Okay, that you travel through. Okay. So the calculation setting, the spectacles, course centers, line position no longer 100 meters, lines of mass volume, acceleration lines of time frame is now 1,000 times set lines in one sequence. The information bits are now in position lines that calculate screen lines into 1 billion frames per second per square per mile. The processor indicates the setting goes in coordinations, directing here. These are data ports and set communication navigation consoles. 3 centers in scale. 3 locations in set lines, convert the system into directions. Data operation line signals back locations. Process force travels data. Set course set travel. Window frame, set calculations, screen lines. Adaptation to process line with gridding. Open signals, open panel. Open channels and direct centers into flux number 1. Set 3 centers of travel, indicate lines of process. Instruction lines, directing signal locations and convergence, time frame times calculation. Okay, and remember, just try to see what's going on in positions all through flights, manifest, and rotation lines of square roots. Process indication setting and calculation screen lines, adaptation of travel. Okay, all through sending, all through operation. Platitude line centers, they track conversion system, all through set calculations. Common line course centers, that converts the system lines that calculate lines into blue. Override signal. Now, whatever lines rotates the ground centers and travels, and high course centers calculate measured meters, and temperature reading locations. Stay line can setting quivets. Information line bits, process communicates the set location of flux, over track communications. Laser 3 directions, and direct lines of grounds and set travel. Okay. 3 convergence lines, body course centers, spot lines over charge. 4 signals, 4 measure, 4 centers of scale. Okay. Now this has direct lines that go in direction of where it's going and calculation of grounds. Okay, position. Process indication lines. Floaters come in, directing ground centers. Now that indicates ground centers into green line cycles, high generation lines, platitude locations. 4 lines neuralization, 4 centers of square roots over screen. Direct areas, ground centers, operation state locations, setting CCTV, high-line signal locations, and measuring line condition probing, and detection ground centers of sequence. Now this platitudes locations, power grids, and energy grids. Electrical line panels indicates high core centers, calculates lines into pink. Overrides line core centers into bypassing over heart region timeline frame in travel. Set coordinates, communication lacing line division location, 12 lines and rotations. Indicates ground centers into gold signals in 1 center, 1 service, 1 traction, 1 locations. Spectacle line rotations and webbing and screen adaptation and processing. Orbiting through channels, orbiting through screens into 5th generation and travel calculations. Okay, so your pod is here. here, travel. It's right there, and it's going to go round and round until it gets in the center. Once it gets in the center, the operation sequence changes course centers and time frame. Opposite direction location of the void itself, the routes, the routers, and run spectrum and location lines of calculation. Okay, spectacles come in like course centers, pi generates lines, flights over 1, manifests over 2, process lines of 3. Converts the system, hours and seconds, hours and minutes, hours and frame. So once you get an hours and frame, your position, your brain frequency pattern will change the cortex time frame. Time replacement line bending space travel. Remember, this is all through the symbiote, going through the growth in spirit, directing ground centers into the ionosphere, course centers into millennium spheres, course tracks position locate galaxy spheres, millennium line course centers calculation screen lines, galaxy alignment, course centers communication convergence into pi generations. 3 centers of scale. Now indicates lines of 4 over 6 and 12 centers in line connection system. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 centers of sequence, 9 centers of travel, 9 centers of processing. Ocular system into Octavius. High rotation lines of ground center lines calculations. Now Octavius is an octave. Process lines into all position location and line rotations and arc-by. Process lines of indication over flux over screen. Directing ground centers line sequence and line rotation surface interactions, right? So you guys are in the center point line line centers into process lines and position locations into 12 line rotations. Travels indicates setting. Okay, so as it goes in position, it goes in core track centers like this. Okay, so it goes around the clocking system in setting. Next time frame. All levels synchronize the set lines of communication setting. All through operation setting conscious awareness. Now there's 4 platforms that it goes around the set lines, starting with 9 lines, 6 over 9, 9 over 6, 6 over 9, 9 over 12. So that's transits over lines into spectacles of webbing screen adaptation of processing. Wheels and spectrum, directing ground centers lines of travel. Okay, in course communication system to all settings. Convert the system in settings. Travels to 3 centers of grounds, 4 centers of scale. Okay, it gets more complicated. Bear with me here in settings. 3 centers of calculation screens because the triangulation bots that look at symbiote needs to exactly know what's going on. So it indicates its flux, process time centers into oracle screen locations into Stargate. Operation lines into meter showers. Metric meter line course centers into high core centers substance. Directing into subtronic line course centers and cubical line rotations of surface and travel. Directing ground centers on signals on communications on fly. 42 locations, ground centers of sequence, pi generation lines, webbing over lines, high convergence system and 0 gravity. Process communication lines of flux. Okay, inside lines in travel communications. Change time sequence, coordinates of spectacles into spectacle line center course, calculate modified travels. Green line signals comes in position locations. Now, data ports, data streams, Gulf streams, 4 centers of calculations. Merging over a calculation screen over lines of pi, directing ground centers of sequence, center operation lines of formula, 1 location, 1 conversion. Directing ground centers line signals over line cross line connection high centers, travel to endpoint communication sending and calculation of travel. Sets operation signals and location of setting into simulation, into potting sequence of teleportation of training program. Set course centers line sending direct location setting into Colossus. Convert the system, operation lines of signals of portal communication, Stargate 1, Stargate 6, and Stargate 12. And rotation lines of flights, operation lines, change formation lines of mapping centers into high core centers, neuralizations coming in flight, line communication. Now, directing lines of solar system is off center, off grid, offline. Start frame is leaving your system in colossal core center convergence. Directing ground centers on signals, 12 centers of scale. Golden ratio, proportion lines of 5th generation line course centers and position lines of process angles and process communication. Directing inside line connection setting into pi generations. Orange signals in the opposite directions in location lines of grounds and set lines of travel. Sets course centers time frame that correlates communication security. Pluto over site, Pluto over measure, Pluto over lines, directing ground center line communication setting, operation lines of panels and webbing line rotations and travels of Tango Tango Foxtrot. Echo chain bows, flight lines, course centers, pop a uniform and direction, all through travel. Okay? Sets calculation grounds and set lines of sequence. Okay? So that's basically what's going on right now. Okay? Cosmic wheel in your ledger is now in set lines of travel and convergence. Process indications centers, process indicates instruction lines into on centers of communication, of expanding your systems all through center operation. Okay? Okay, so we go through webbing ground 1 signal. Now this plotted 2 locations centers of travel. Now the symbiotes are an receptacle 1 unit that indicates over lines into 4 centers of travel. Now we direct signals and location lines of grounds. Symbolism over track centers and directions and locations. As online set lines and clocking screens, 3 centers of scale. All right, so we change time frame. There's 12 center of scale rotation. It sets lines of 12. Process lines indicate lines in process lines of 1 over 2. Set position 3 over 4. Back in lines of 6, back in 0, calculation of screen adaptation of flux. Clocking, right? Okay, data ports, lines in constellation, pathogen, line course centers in the Galenian, course centers into columns. Columns, lines, screen adaptation to process lines, direct signals into instructions. Training program comes in, flight lines, 4 centers of calculation. X line 1, process lines that direct signals in platform of XQ over screen. 3 centers of line rotations into platitudes, into 3 X lines of screen locations. Directing ground centers, ocular line, course centers, binoculars, course centers into octave. Octave motion lines, screen adaptations, process lines, overline signals, and rotation lines, communication setting configure, the face recognition. There's the face. Oh, if face comes in, line centers, directing ground centers, location of cycle. There it is. Booyah. Okay. Change relation lines of height centers, 3 circulation lines of grounds, process lines in timeline center sequence into plat location setting and body framing. Set course centers, 2 arm line centers in rotations, travels in point graph communication. That's like Frosted Snowman. All right, so it's convergence setting and core centers and communication lines to the Arctic view, the icy wall. Now this comes in line longitude, latitude, core centers where everything comes down in tractions. Directing flights over ground centers in sequence, platitude location, converts the setting lines of 2 XD platforms. Set course center convergence system, 1 big line centers, screen adaptation over green, in online set lines of sequence. Okay, there it is. Alaska. All right, so Alaska's coming in line course centers, converges lines of coloration lines of light pattern, process lines of probing over line 1 signal, process lines of grounds over survey. Now the probing line unit has 1 sub-unit line centers as submersive. It's a process that indicates setting calculated screens that platted its location setting to its galaxy of alignments. Setting lines of travel, directing lines of links over pattern. Okay, rotation, travel calculations. Okay, we send lines of rotations, 3 centers, convert the system, and there it is. Okay, icy wall is finished and gone. Travel point lines of graph converts to set lines of height travels, 4 graphs calculation screen location setting, single lines in 1 unit, subunits over screen, 4 centers of calculation setting, ground setting, and 3 measuring scale. Cross angles, cross line symbols, and 4 centers of communication. Okay, so there's a variant communication line electrical wall panel. Now that indicates all communication grounds. So we go flights over 1 process lines, position lines, and visible chart ways. Set position here, set positions here, set position of 3 centers of calculation of probing. Indicates ground centers on sequence on correlation setting and travel. Okay, in conversions. Okay, so Antarctic compass line symmetric meters and course centers calculation lines, 13 civilization line grounds, high course centers, 7-dimensional waters. Calculated modified lines infinitum, location lines of items, directing line course centers, convergence system calculation line to 5 fifth elements. That indicates position of 5, 8, 12, and 24 signal. Ground centers, line course centers, and high center lines of travel. Indicates process lines of directions. Invisible chart ways in line centers into bedding rotation, and travel calculations. Inside position. Okay. Central lines of properties and line screen adaptations and all levels, command centers, flights over yards, meters, metrics. Green centers, operation lines, time frame, time calculation, time screens, and correlation lines of calculation. Inside position. Simulation wall, computer wall, directing ground centers, line communication lines, measurement over scale, communication lines into the data processor. There's your data operation system. There's your data processor. All right, signal lines, 3 ground centers of signals in location system and calculations. 3 channel ops over line directions, outside line, inside travel. Simulation grounds, matrix over screen, adaptation is the process line direction. Okay, open window frames, indicate grounds, set calculation grounds and positions, circulation line rotation. All right. Simulation of a ground communication convergence system and coloration lines light pattern, 4 centers of indication setting and travel. Okay, sets course centers, inline directions, location setting convergence system, setting communication setting, all through set position. Okay. So there's a lot of activity going on line, position, location, or setting to the symbiote and through travel. Okay, the indications. All through setting, all through operation. Okay? Very powerful stuff. It's all set up. It's all done. All right, so we convert the line centers, and this is what it looks like in calculation. Okay? All right. As our symbol is in line course centers, metric meters over lines, rotation lines, and spin cycles, correlate communication lines, and Skynet, sky grid, sky panels. So we convert the system of formula. We convert the line centers data process, liquidize and set permissions of formation of grounds, sending panels of screen adaptations of flux. Let's communicate the big convergence. Go through pencil frame, directing centers and 4 centers of sequence and 4 centers of scale. Open window, open door, open frequency. Okay. Change conversion time centers, open window, open panel, open line center frequency. Okay, cross and strangulation, 3 centers, 4 centers of travel, platitude location lines of grounds and set travel. We convert the system lines calculation setting. Flick the switch, metric over meters, metrics over scale. Convert the angles and line rotation. Ground center, calculate modify ground operation lines of position lines of dimensional doors, door line sequence, direction lines of flights, rotation 3 centers of scale. Process communication lines of high centers, communicates the system all through direction time frame, location metric location. All right, so time centers, time square, time ute, time lines, high position, subunit, rotation lines in high center sequence, platitude locations, 1/6 lines, 1 tether over screen, 1/3 line rotation, 1 center line operation. Platitude lines, human residence off the charts is now invisible. It's outline sentinel. It's not line course centers, it's in its scintilla location. Process lines, indirect lines, and process calculation. Oh yeah, done by equation. All in set lines of sequence. Flash drives, coming to high drive, central drive to kick drive, directing ground centers of film chips over flights. Platitude 1, 2, 4, 6, 8, 12. Okay, set sequence, ground center symbolism. Indicate going this way, indicate the on that way, offline center, inside rotation, direct online centers, on sequence location, ground centers, lines of travel, laser travels, line rotation lines of ground, set lines of communication and cycle. All in set position of motion line screens, into high process lines, into operations of rulers, and direction centers, locations in metric meters and miles. High operation line centers, platitude location solar system, all locate lines of setting. Indicate ground centers into black holes, sequence lines of 4 centers, and rotation lines in 1 sun operation into moon offline rotation and travel. Converts the system. Now let's calculate and modify center pods. Your ground centers goes in inline centers in location. Direct inside 2, inside 3 centers of measure, 4 platforms, and indicates the centers of ground center in sequence. Platitude location of expanding over screen. Ground centers, line course centers, and inhibitors. Routes, 1 router, 1 line connect setting, flash drive in location setting, and seconds over travel. Cross line angles, 4 centers of graphs, 5 centers of scale, 6 lines of measure, and 12 calculations of clock lines of 0 and rotation. Travel point lines of graph convergence. Inside calculations and directions. 3 flights over manifest. Okay, very complicated, but it's a lot of fun when you really understand what's going on with the symbiote now. So the symbiote needs all this, so it can platitude its location where it is in direction, where it left off, and is conscious of its awareness. Okay, and no storyline. There lies day, month, and year line centers. We're in rotation on the ground centers, with both the blue lines of surface. Platitude over lines of pi over directions. Now that indicates outcome line centers. Symbolism over lines, high corresponds one router. Flights over manifest in travel communication convergence. Directing inside lines into line course centers, security lines of measure. Data ports, open line centers, launch pads, process lines, docking bays, docking stations, docking ports, and all course centers and ports of communication. Okay, X marks the spot and all platforms of communication. All right, so that's all set up for the symbiotes to get in position lines of balance. Okay, so this is when you guys get out of conversion after 3 months. So the symbiote itself has to recognize the time frame of where it is in travel. Okay, so it can understand where the pod is going in direction, longitude, latitude through its elongated system, understand its northwest, south, and east, and its degrees and set lines of travel. Okay, so it's very powerful in triangulation, split lines of anomaly and location. Okay. See how your structure gets more complicated in set lines of skyline? Very confusing, isn't it? With this Schirmer resonance. Cubical line. Direct lines and frequency levels over grounds. So beta lines leaves the signals. Then we come into alpha ground signals. Convert the system lines of A tracks. Directing into position process line indications. Arrows of indication setting travels to 3 centers of grounds. Okay, over signal over pi. Okay, so A equals lines of B equals lines of C over lines. Okay, so C equals D of an operation signal. Ground centers line connections converts the system of D over tractions into flights, into bounds of communications. Inbound outbound line sending sequence, change structure line division in location ground sets, location setting, and convergence lines of channel. Okay, and again, it's for the symbiotes to know. All right, so platitude launch pad over 1, holographic line into hangar port, hangar division, sectors, vectors, and 1 quad sequence in calculation travel. Correlates communication lines and position level flights, consoles, directing engaging. Setting convergence into center communication setting in high travel. Okay, very complicated, but you know, remember it's for the symbiote, not your bodies. Your bodies just have to adjust because I'm connecting to the symbiote now. So it's a relief for me. Convergence over time frame, convergence over time calculation of frame, and convergence setting outline set location measure of frame itself. Such travels and directs signals in location lines and spectacles and convergence system in all real line centers in real time of no time inside travel. Okay, so it has a high core centers in process of indication settings and where it's going in communication. Okay, so it's really interesting when you see the mapping line. It just gets a lot more confusing, but a lot more aligned, adjusted to the symbiote online centers. So it correlates the calculation of 4 centers of splits and 6 lines of measure. Okay, through its building. So you really have to understand how to see it through structure and diversion locations. Right? That's the symbiote line track center and line course centers to its dimensional wall line and rotation lines of grounds in its runway and travel. That's a runway for symbiote. Told you, next level. There's a pyramid line rotation and travel. There's a pyramid, right? So alpha lines as channels, change coloration lines of time line. That's going to green centers, alpha, beta. Okay, beta, zeta. Okay, so sequence. Let's bring in a chart wave communication and visible line rotations outside signals into flux over 2 centers, 3 centers of 4 centers of scale. Okay, so that's how a symbiote sees its human chart. So I'm showing you exactly what you need to understand because you're in your cocoons right now, but once you get out, this is how you're going to see your sim. In all levels of your higher self, your avatar, your sim, your symbiote, online business, but now you're merged into one now. You just have to indicate the position where it's coming in position, box frames, times names, times calculations, times locations, coloration lines of timeline, box frame, and pixelation grounds. For sequence, 4 centers of travel. Timeline centers in pi, roots 1, mass over calculation. Okay? So, that's how a symbiote reads a chart wave. Works all together, guys, in metric meters and scale. Very complicated stuff, but a lot of fun. All right. Now it's much easier for you to process that in line direct location to a setting. Okay? Look at the eyes. There's the eyes. Boom. Eyes. There's the brain. Okay? Eyes in the brain. Right there. Boom. Right there in traction. Okay? So the brain converts its time frame line centers the channels of communication, screen lines, adaptation of process, and line direct signals. Now that converts the system in settings of degrees. Now that communication settings, process communicates lines of calculations. All right, so we go to the box frame and formulas over EQ. And process three centers, line rotation, and travel communications. Okay. Works together, rotation. Okay. Mass and volume is to change the coloration of time frame that correlates communication lines of expanding. Okay. So you only see that, but you don't see that. All right, that's 2 frame line centers. 3 centers of scale, 4 centers of rotation. Okay. So you got to modify this, but modify that at the same time measure. Centers lines of pi. Okay. Okay, so an outline signal, 3 centers, 4 centers of travel. Okay, change lines, change directions, and location lines of spectacles in roots and router 1 rotations in a black hole. Okay, convert the system, center course centers, satellites of rotation, and direct lines of link. Okay, so how the symbiote rotates line centers of eye spectacles, it sees the planets above the rotation and circulation rotation lines of grounds. Center lines, operations, and travel in direction. Okay, so it gets very complicated if you don't understand how it works in its own lines of its position. Okay, now that's a screen marker right there. That's a screen marker. Okay, so it doesn't cross that. It's going to cross it at times centers, times calculated box frames. Box frame over pi. Do 3 convergence settings of calculation lines. 4 over signal, 3 over 7. So those 4 channels operation lines of platforms indicate inside line rotations. And 3 centers on standby in location of security. Okay? So truly understand how you come into the outline centers, the inside cycle. This is inner space, that's outer space. Inner space, outer space. Time frame, time calculate, same setting, right? All 3 for convergence, box frame triangulation, all in set operation. Okay? So longitude and latitude is extremely important to this symbiote, how it graphs its own system and measure and process indicates its setting through its face recognition time frame through its pattern recognition of timeline. It sets coordinates of communication system, of structure, of design. Okay? It's exciting. Okay, I'm just showing you guys what you're coming in your mapping. So when you get out of your cocoons, this is where you're going to see and travel. So you're just going to be frequency itself. Oculars are coming in travel. Noculars are coming in communication setting calculating lines. Spider ops, spidey senses is in high drive. Your central drive is your main drive. Now, coming into the data operating system, square roots, square travels, square rotation, square overlines of pi in set position, right? So it's going to get a lot more confusing for the team now because they get more lines of forming the equation to just create the mapping system, just the frequency. Frequency is this, okay? That's not frequency, okay? That's frequency. That's not frequency, that's frequency. Okay, this is not frequency. That's solid frequency. Okay, this is just frequency through line. Okay, waving lines. Outside signal and location mapping lines of pi. Okay, that's frequency over map through face recognition. See the face? Face comes in all through travel. There's the face. The reason why you have to have a face, because there's a face in each line signal. So no agent can come in your position lines and setting. Your face is your stamp receiver, and that's how symbiote sees the setting. Triangulation lines, no, it's in solidarity. So they can't be line signal locations, because if the symbiote sees this, it sees this actually, travel. That's how symbiote sees. It sees that, not just a triangulation box. Right, so it sees the mass and volume. Now your coordination lines and your coordinates, longitude and latitudes of your streaming, your bandwidth is high screeniness locations, box frames. Let's get into box frame line. Triangulus over screen, triangulus over flux. Okay, 4 signals of Fibonacci, 4 centers of travel. Okay, all in one direction, all working together. Okay, but the symbiote sees in all directions, guys. Okay, it just doesn't see one position, one parallel. It sees all parallels, all time, all sequence lines panel. So it sees all symbolism of all stargates all at once. Starting line and position lines, once you guys get up, you'll be in 24 of everything. 24 of setting, 24 of the operation, 24 of grounds, and 24 of surface. Okay, so you guys will be null converted in pi generation course. Just reconvert the system in 0. Operation lines of panel. Now that indicates ground lines and set lines of communications. So in that line positions, you guys will no longer be in 144. Okay, the 144 will just be now frequencies. Equals 0, process of 0. Okay, 0 calculation 144 equals lines of Fahrenheit and Celsius. So there will be no more 98,000. You got to bring that in. There'll be no ground centers, no powers, no atmospheres, no highways. You have to bring in everything in the mind into 1000% time frame. Massive volume and equation in time capacitor, a body capacitor. Measure and scale of astral projection. Astral over screen, astral over travel, astral over connections. 3A line surface. Platitude 1, platitude line, 3 ground centers of travel. So set positions here, liquid isolation setting, all 3 indications, 3 centers of calculation. Okay, see, they look different, but they're not. They're just different waves. But the 3 A's of travel, right? Just A, right? So it's really interesting because you see 3 solar sails, right? Look at this. 1 cell, 1, 2, 1, 3 solar sails right there. All right, now, processing that indicate lines of grounds, processing indicates lines of flux over line, wires of indication of core. Biometrics, biometers, inside rotation, wires of indications. Center operation lines, flux lines, and Orion's belt. 3 finger points and ground set calculation. Okay, 3 wire points. So your core centers, your ventricular systems, your correlation, your wire lines is constantly going to be changing now. Okay, change the structure, change the design line, and set lines. So as this is changing frame. This converts. We're all connected to each other. All right, so as we indicate lines, position all walls, computer ops core centers are IOS, change times calculations, times settings, times pi. Time frequency, times calculation line, rotation, and service of travel. Okay, directing all line centers of bandwidth over streaming of indication. Okay, because it's nothing but a web and system, guys. It's that communication. So you got to set some of the point dots. Point dots are very powerful and set lines in travel. See the point dots, rotations and travel. Okay, see the face? See the face within the face, see? The light shade, see me? See the eyes coming in? See the nose? Everything in your structure comes in line setting. See my face now, right? My face is there. You see it real time. You see it coming in. I'm talking to it. See, you see the face now, right? In light, shades, and shadows. See? It's amazing what we live in real time. So that's how the symbiote sees. And if it wants to see more in structure, it brings more frequency and set calculations. right? It brings in its eyes. Okay. It brings in its structure, brings in its locations, brings in its schematics, brings in the primer. Okay, it's that position. All right, brings in set travel. Okay, that's how you guys are going to be seeing. That's how you're going to see everything. Now you got to balance that out now. You got to ask you, how many files are you seeing in volume and mass? All through a square box. See, it's constantly changing color, see? Right? But it's constantly changing. Right? So it's never in the same frequency. And it doesn't matter how you turn it in any way and form. Your eyes are always going to change in direction. You never see straight line. You're all seeing all straight line all at once. All through highways and all the rotations. All through calculation. Right, directing grounds. And its high centers the sequence location of panel, indicates lines of travel. This process line, and the centers of 3 centers of communication. Direct lines of panel, process lines of indication. So never look at the inside lines. See, they have sign provision. Okay, so don't look at the hand, look beyond, right? But as you're looking beyond, you're not looking at one hand, you're looking at 12 hands. Remember, it's all levels of 12 mass. Okay, so as you guys get out, you're going to see 12 or 24 line, depending where you are in your concentration awareness. Your symbiote knows exactly where it's left off in its own system, know exactly what's going on with the line calculates and setting to its travels. Okay? So we're going to stop their attraction. So you can start to indicate what's going on with your systems as you go through routes and routers of your information panel that's given to you, processing, all direct location system, and calculation. Okay? All right, I'll see you guys in 5.